A blizzard night in Seattle. Through the frost-glazed windows of a perfect house, two small coats hung side by side, pink, identical, still dripping with melted snow. The stepmother at the door smiled too sweetly. They locked themselves in again, she said. Twins can be dramatic. But when Officer Luke Carter stepped inside, his canine partner Nova froze. The air carried the sharp scent of ozone and burnt hair. Not panic, but punishment. Upstairs, behind a half-open laundry door, two little girls huddled together, arms trembling, eyes wide as snowlight. And in that too-perfect home, the silence broke. Not with a scream, but with the quiet truth only a dog's instincts could find. Snow pressed against the windows of Winter Hollow Lane, soft and relentless, turning Seattle's hills into a pale dream of silence. The Brooks house stood alone on the cul-de-sac, tall and elegant, its white walls glowing faintly beneath the street lamp. Inside, it was too quiet for a home with children. Victoria Hale Brooks, 36, stood in the kitchen wearing a silk robe the color of champagne. Her beauty was deliberate, auburn curls, sculpted cheekbones, and lips painted in the shade of control. She was the kind of woman who measured her smiles the way others measured sugar, never too much, never sincere. 2 years earlier, she had married Daniel Brooks, a widower whose fortune came from real estate and whose loneliness came from losing his wife in a car crash. Victoria saw opportunity in both. Daniel was rarely home now. Business trips had become his refuge, leaving her with the two daughters he adored, Emma and Ella, 8-year-old twins whose laughter once filled the halls but now only echoed in memory. Victoria stirred her tea, her reflection in the dark glass of the window staring back at her. The snow outside muffled everything. No neighbors, no witnesses, no sound except the faint ticking of the clock above the fridge. Upstairs, a soft noise, a door creaking, made her jaw tighten. In the room above, Emma Brooks sat cross-legged on the carpet, her thin arms wrapped around her knees. Her sister Ella, identical but a little smaller, traced circles on the frosted window with her fingertip. They were mirror images, light brown hair tied in braids, pale faces, and large gray-blue eyes that looked older than their years. Only their silence made them different. Ella still whispered sometimes, soft and shaky. Emma didn't speak at all anymore, not since last month, not since the iron. Victoria's voice rose from the hall, smooth as silk sliding over glass. "Girls, downstairs, now!" The twins flinched but obeyed. Their small feet made almost no sound on the polished steps. In the living room, the fire burned low, the air thick with lavender and something sharper, the metallic scent of hot appliances. Victoria turned, smiling without warmth. "You know what happens when we steal?" she said sweetly, holding up an open jewelry box. A diamond bracelet glimmered under the light, one stone missing. "Which of you touched it?" Emma looked down, hands trembling. Ella tried to speak, her voice breaking. "We didn't—" "Quiet." The word cracked like a whip. Victoria's eyes flicked to the counter, to the curling iron still plugged in from earlier. Her smile returned, perfect again. "We'll talk about this later. Go upstairs." The girls obeyed, retreating to their shared room, a room that looked like a catalog, all pastels and perfection, yet felt colder than the snow outside. Ella crawled onto the bed and hid her face in the pillow. Emma sat beside her, listening to the faint hum of sea. Electricity below, the sound of something dangerous waiting to happen again. At that same hour, across town, Officer Luke Carter sat in his patrol SUV parked under the overpass near Pike Street. He was 39, broad-shouldered, with weathered hands and the kind of face carved from patience. Sharp jawline, faint stubble, lines that deepened when he thought too long. His dark hair had started to gray at the temples, and his eyes carried the weight of someone who had seen too many quiet tragedies. Before joining the Seattle police, Luke had served 10 years as a Marine, a career that left him with both discipline and a reluctance to believe in luck. He trusted routine, not miracles. The only partner who had never failed him sat in the back seat. Nova, a 5-year-old German shepherd with thick sable fur, golden eyes, and a calm, steady intelligence that made her both sentinel and solace. Nova lifted her head when the dispatch radio crackled to life. "Unit 14, domestic disturbance, minors involved, Winter Hollow Lane, North District." Luke glanced at his watch, 9:42 p.m. Snow was coming harder now, erasing tire tracks and time. He took a sip of coffee gone cold and muttered, "Let's go, girl." When they arrived, the Brooks house looked peaceful, untouched by the storm. Too peaceful. Victoria met them at the door with that same orchestrated grace, her robe now cinched tighter, her voice trembling just enough. "Officer, thank God, they've locked themselves in the laundry room again. I think they're hurting themselves. They stole my bracelet and panicked." Luke nodded, though something in his gut twisted. "Anyone else home?" "My husband's away on business," she said, voice steadying too quickly. Nova sniffed the air as they stepped inside. Her tail dropped slightly. Luke caught the faintest trace. Ozone, singed hair, the metallic tang of a heated element. "Where's the laundry room?" "Upstairs," Victoria replied. "Please be gentle. They're fragile." Luke didn't answer. He climbed the stairs slowly, boots quiet against the wood, Nova pacing beside him. At the top landing, the hallway stretched pale and perfect, the air almost humming. The laundry door was slightly ajar, a strip of light spilling out. Luke pushed it open. The two girls sat pressed against the wall, arms around each other, eyes wide. The iron on the counter glowed faint red, its cord tangled like a snake. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Nova whined softly, lowering her head. "Ishe, ma'am," as if she already understood what words could not yet say. The soft hum of the laundry room light flickered as Officer Luke Carter knelt beside the two girls. Emma's small frame trembled, her hand clutching Ella's sleeve. The burn marks on Ella's wrist were blistered and fresh, thin as the edges of cruelty. Luke's voice dropped to a whisper, calm but firm. "It's all right, sweetheart. You're safe now." Nova crept forward, her golden eyes steady and gentle, lowering her head until it rested on the girl's knees. The twins didn't flinch this time. The warmth of the shepherd was different from the heat that had scarred them. Downstairs, the muffled click of heels echoed, Victoria's patience pacing itself. Luke unplugged the iron, the faint hiss of cooling metal breaking the silence. "Stay here," he said softly, rising to his feet. He stepped into the hallway just as Officer Grace Holloway appeared at the top of the stairs. Grace was 32, tall and athletic, her blonde hair cropped short beneath her winter cap. She had sharp green eyes, the kind that noticed every bruise and every lie before a word was spoken. Once a social worker before joining the Seattle police, Grace carried a quiet empathy that often unsettled the guilty. "CPS pinged me on your call," she said, holding up her notepad. "You've got minors?" Luke nodded toward the door. "Twin girls, burns, maybe more. Stepmother claims self-harm." Grace's jaw tightened. That story never gets old. As they descended the stairs, Victoria met them in the living room, all false calm and tearfully arranged sorrow. "Officers, I truly don't understand what's happening. I love those girls, but they have issues." Her hand brushed her neck, where a diamond pendant caught the firelight, the real one, untouched. Luke's eyes lingered on it for a second before replying, "We'll let medical confirm that, ma'am." Grace moved quietly, her pen scratching against the form clipped to her board. "Mrs. Brooks, I'll need to see the girls' rooms and get contact info for their father." The name made Victoria stiffen. "Daniel is away on business in Chicago. He won't appreciate strangers questioning his family." Nova circled near the base of the stairs, nose low. She stopped by the radiator, whining softly. Luke crouched beside her. The metal grill was warm, but the smell rising from it was wrong, faintly sweet, like scorched fabric. He unscrewed the cover slightly, revealing a tiny patch of melted ribbon caught inside. Pink satin, burned at the edges. Grace saw his face harden. "Evidence?" she whispered. "Something," Luke said. When they returned upstairs, the twins hadn't moved far. Grace knelt beside them, her tone soft, maternal. "Hey there, I'm Grace. I just need to take a quick look at those arms, okay? No one's mad?" Ella hesitated, but when Nova lay down again, the girl's shoulders loosened. Grace examined the burns, neat, deliberate. "Luke," she murmured, "those were pressed, not accidental." He nodded grimly. "I know." Victoria's voice rose from the hallway. "I don't see why this circus is necessary. Children lie. Everyone knows that." Luke turned toward her slowly, his tone even but cold. "Then you won't mind if they tell us themselves." She froze, her smile twitching. "They won't talk. They never do." Downstairs, the doorbell rang. Backup had arrived. Paramedic Evan Ruiz, a young man in his late 20s with dark curls and a face marked by quiet exhaustion, stepped in carrying a trauma kit. He had kind brown eyes, the kind that spoke before his mouth did. "Evening, officers," he said, voice low but steady. "Kids hurt bad?" Grace motioned him upstairs. "Moderate burns. They'll need treatment." Evan crouched near the twins, his touch gentle. "You did good hanging on, okay? I'm just going to clean this up a bit." The smell of antiseptic filled the air, clean but heavy. As Evan worked, Luke questioned Victoria near the doorway. "You called 911? Said they locked themselves in the laundry room. Why?" Her voice was silk again, her body still. "Because they were panicking. They have always had emotional problems, trauma from losing their mother." "So you thought heat therapy was the cure?" Luke asked quietly. She laughed, brittle. "You twist everything," Nova growled softly. The sound froze the air. Luke's gaze didn't waver. "We'll sort truth from twisting soon enough." Within minutes, Grace had filed her initial report. CPS custody recommendation, immediate removal. Evan closed his kit and looked at Luke. "Hospital's ready." Luke nodded, helping Ella to her feet while Emma clung to Nova's collar. Outside, the snow had thickened, the driveway buried in white silence. The flashing ambulance lights painted the world red and blue, bleeding color into the snow. As they carried the girls out, Victoria called after them from the doorway, her voice suddenly sharp. "You can't take them. Daniel will hear of this. He'll ruin you." Luke turned, his breath visible in the cold. "He'll hear everything. From them." He closed the ambulance door and watched it vanish into the storm. Nova stood beside him, fur dusted with flakes, her breath steaming. For the first time that night, the Brooks house looked exactly as it was, beautiful, empty, and afraid of its own reflection. The storm had not stopped by morning. Snow draped every rooftop of Seattle's North District, and the hospital windows glowed like faint lanterns behind the veil of frost. Inside St. Catherine's Children's Wing, the world was hushed. No sirens, no shouts, only the soft hum of heat vents and the distant chime of medical monitors. Officer Luke Carter stood beside the twin beds where Emma and Ella Brooks lay. The sisters had been admitted overnight under emergency protection. Emma, still silent, kept one hand resting on her twin's wrist, even while sleeping. Ella stirred occasionally, murmuring in half-formed dreams. Nova, lying curled near the radiator, kept her golden eyes half open, every breath slow and measured. Her thick sable fur shimmered in the sterile light, and her ears twitched at every sound. The German shepherd looked like a statue of loyalty, carved out of patience itself. A soft knock came at the door. Dr. Marisol Chen, the attending pediatrician, stepped in with a clipboard. She was in her early 40s, petite but commanding, her black hair tied neatly in a bun, round glasses framing calm brown eyes. Born to immigrant parents who had run a small clinic in Tacoma, she had grown up treating wounds before she ever learned to name them. Her tone was warm but precise, the voice of someone who understood the language of pain better than denial. "Officer Carter," she said quietly, "the girls are stable. No internal trauma, but multiple healed injuries. That means this wasn't the first time." Luke nodded grimly. "I figured," Marisol sighed. "The burns were deliberate, uniform pressure. Someone wanted control, not chaos." She glanced toward Nova and smiled faintly. "Beautiful animal. She's been here all night?" "Wouldn't leave," Luke replied. "Neither would I." The door opened again. Nora Patel, a social services agent from Child Protective Services, entered with the air of someone who'd seen too many broken homes to be surprised anymore. In her mid-30s, Indian American, dressed in a gray sweater and long coat dusted with snow, she had soft features framed by dark curls and eyes that could weigh truth without judgment. "Morning, officer," she greeted, setting her tablet on the counter. "We got your report. The stepmother's statement doesn't line up with what we're seeing." "No surprise there," Luke said. "You'll want to interview the girls, but I'd wait. The older one isn't speaking yet." Nora nodded, her tone even. "We'll take it slow. First step is safety, not statements." She crouched beside the bed, speaking softly. "Hi, Emma. Hi, Ella. I'm Nora. You're at the hospital. You don't have to be scared anymore." Emma didn't answer, but her gaze flickered. A small acknowledgement, like a door opening a crack. Grace Holloway arrived moments later, her uniform replaced by a heavy gray coat and a wool scarf. Her face was pale from exhaustion, but her green eyes stayed sharp. "The DA's office already flagged Victoria Hale Brooks for investigation," she said, handing Luke a folder. but she's playing the victim. Claims the girls have a disorder, says she was following a therapist's advice. Luke's brow furrowed. Therapist? Grace nodded grimly. Supposedly one named Dr. Arthur Lang, but there's no active license under that name. Luke muttered, fake credentials. Figures. Grace leaned against the wall. We'll verify everything, but I've seen this pattern before. Narcissistic abuser uses fabricated medical authority to cover cruelty. CPS is pushing for permanent removal. Nora added softly, we'll also look into the father's involvement. If he ignored this, the court will need evidence. The door opened once more to admit Daniel Brooks, their father. He was 41, tall and handsome in a way success often preserves. Salt and pepper hair, tailored coat, the faint scent of expensive cologne that didn't belong in a hospital. His dark eyes, though, told a different story. Guilt and fear. The mixture of a man who had built walls out of work and was watching them collapse. Where are they? He asked, voice trembling. Luke studied him silently before answering. They're safe, but you need to hear what's been happening. Daniel stepped closer to the beds, his jaw tightening, as he saw the burns wrapped in clean gauze. She said they hurt themselves, he whispered, shaking his head. She said they were unstable after their mother died. Nora's tone was calm but cutting. Mr. Brooks, the evidence shows otherwise. These injuries were inflicted. He sank into a chair, covering his face with both hands. I left them. I thought I was giving them stability. Luke said quietly, you left them with someone who only wanted control. Nova rose and padded closer to the twins, her tail sweeping the floor. Emma's hand moved toward her fur, fingers brushing the warmth. The small gesture broke the tension in the room. Dr. Chen smiled faintly. Connection before confession, she murmured. Grace glanced at Luke. We'll need statements from all three of them. The father, the stepmother, and the kids when they're ready. CPS will take temporary custody pending the court hearing. Daniel looked up. Can I stay? Nora nodded. For now, yes, but under observation. Hours passed, the storm easing outside. Snow turned to rain, streaking the windows. Inside, Luke stood watching the father sit between the two beds, whispering apologies that came too late but still mattered. He felt Nova's nose nudge his hand, grounding him. For all the cruelty he had seen, this, a child finding safety in silence, was what made him stay in the job. As he turned to leave, Nora's voice stopped him. Officer, you did the right thing last night. Luke gave a tired smile. I hope so, for their sake. Outside, the sky began to clear, and for the first time since the call came, the city seemed to breathe again. Night had fallen again over Seattle, the city glittering beneath melting snow, and streetlights that shimmered like fading stars. Inside St. Catherine's Hospital, Officer Luke Carter stood by the wide window of the children's ward, watching droplets trace lazy paths down the glass. The storm was gone, but the weight of what lingered inside the hospital felt heavier than the snow that had blanketed the night before. Behind him, the quiet rhythm of monitors filled the silence. Emma and Ella Brooks were still under protective observation, both asleep now, curled close together under the same blanket. Even in sleep, their hands found each other, two halves of the same small courage. Daniel Brooks, their father, sat between the beds, elbows on his knees, head bowed. His coat was gone, replaced by a borrowed sweater that hung loose around his frame. The sharp businessman's posture was gone too. In its place, the slumped shoulders of a man who had run out of excuses. Luke watched him for a long moment before speaking. The court hearing's been scheduled for Friday, he said quietly. Daniel didn't look up. They'll take them from me, won't they? His voice was rough, almost boyish in its defeat. They'll decide what's best for them, Luke replied. That might include you, if you're willing to fight for it the right way. The door opened, and Detective Owen Hale stepped in, the sharp scent of cold air following him. Owen was in his mid-40s, tall and solidly built, with gray flecks in his dark beard and deep lines that came not from age but from carrying too much anger for too long. His brown trench coat was damp from the snow, his badge clipped to the breast pocket. He had been Luke's partner years ago before a failed hostage case had cost him his faith in people. That old failure still lived behind his eyes. Carter, he said in his gravelly baritone, you really know how to drag me into messes. His gaze shifted to the girls, and something softened. CPS sent me to take the official statement for the report. Looks like hell froze over in that house. Luke handed him the case file. It's all in there. Burns, bruises, evidence of staged accidents, the stepmothers claiming psychological manipulation by the kids. Owen snorted. Classic abuser defense, make the victims look mad so you can stay clean. He flipped through the photos, jaw tightening. You get the scent analysis back? The lab confirmed trace thermal residue on the iron, consistent with deliberate use, Luke said. Nova found fabric in the heating vent, same match as the kids' pajamas. At that name, Nova lifted her head from the floor near the bed, ears pricking. Her golden eyes caught the fluorescent light, reflecting steady intelligence. Owen smiled faintly. Still the best partner you've ever had. Luke chuckled quietly. She doesn't argue back. The German shepherd gave a slow wag of her tail, then settled again. Her body curved protectively near the twins. As they spoke, Nora Patel entered carrying a tablet, her expression grave. Victoria Hale's interview just wrapped up downtown, she said. She's denying everything, but the forensics will sink her. We also located the fake therapist's name she used, Dr. Arthur Lang. Turns out it's a stolen identity from a retired psychologist who's been living in Arizona for 5 years. Owen muttered, she went that far just to build her illusion of control. Nora nodded. People like her don't want family, they want obedience. Dr. Marisol Chen joined them moments later, a cup of tea in her hands. The soft lighting caught the tired kindness in her eyes. Emma's starting to respond to sensory therapy, she said. We used Nova's presence to stabilize her anxiety. Animals can trigger oxytocin release. It helps with trust rebuilding. Luke smiled slightly. Nova's been doing that since she was a pup. He remembered the first time he had seen the dog, rescued from a failed training unit, left behind because she was too gentle. He'd taken her anyway. Gentle, he thought, was exactly what this job needed. Daniel finally looked up, his voice low. If she goes to prison, what happens to my girls? Nora sat across from him, her tone professional yet soft. CPS will petition for you to regain temporary custody, but only under monitored supervision. You'll need to complete family rehabilitation and trauma counseling. This isn't punishment, Mr. Brooks. It's protection. He nodded slowly, the first sign of something like resolve flickering through the exhaustion. I'll do whatever it takes, he said quietly. Owen leaned against the wall, crossing his arms. You'd better, because the court won't give second chances after this. Luke glanced at him, a trace of warning in his tone. He's trying, Owen. The detective shrugged, his own memories flickering behind his guarded eyes. A case years ago, a little boy he hadn't reached in time. He looked away. Trying doesn't always save anyone. Silence stretched for a moment before the sound of Ella's soft voice broke it. Is she gone? The question was small, fragile. Luke turned. Ella was awake, her gray-blue eyes glistening under the dim light. Emma stirred beside her, clutching the blanket. Luke crouched beside them. She can't hurt you anymore, he said. Ella looked at Nova, then back at him. Promise? He met her gaze. Promise. Nova rose slowly, resting her head on the edge of the bed. The little girl reached out, brushing her small hand across the dog's fur. Daniel covered his mouth, tears welling unbidden. It was the first honest sound in the room, a father's quiet grief. Outside the window, rain turned the snow into a river of glistening meltwater, carrying away what was left of the storm. By the time the Yisti lights dimmed for night rounds, Owen had left to file his report, Nora was making final notes for the custody petition, and Marisol was updating charts. Luke stood alone by the doorway, watching the twins drift back to sleep. Nova pressed against his leg, and he whispered to her, "You did good, girl." The shepherd blinked up at him, then rested her head on her paws. In that moment, the hospital felt almost peaceful, not healed, but beginning to breathe again. The Friday morning hearing dawned under a pale winter sun. Seattle's skyline shimmered behind thin clouds, the kind that looked soft but carried the weight of coming rain. Outside the King County Courthouse, the air smelled of wet asphalt and salt from the nearby bay. Officer Luke Carter stood beside his patrol SUV, watching the courthouse steps where people hurried past in dark coats. Beside him, Nova, her sable fur freshly brushed, sat alert, her eyes calm but watchful. She wasn't allowed inside the courtroom, but Luke could tell she understood. The dog had sensed tension since sunrise. "Stay close, girl," he said softly. Nova tilted her head, as if she could hear more than words, as if she knew this was the day everything would shift. Inside, the courtroom felt colder than the air outside. The walls were lined with dark oak, and light filtered through tall windows and gray ribbons. Judge Harriet Lowell, a woman in her late 50s with silver hair tied in a no-nonsense bun, presided at the bench. Her lined face carried the calm authority of someone who had seen both truth and lies wear the same clothes too many times. She wore no jewelry, save for a simple wedding band that had dulled from years of use. Case number 24-107, State of Washington versus Victoria Hale Brooks, she announced, voice firm yet even. Charges include child abuse, falsifying medical identity, and obstruction of justice. In the gallery sat Daniel Brooks, dressed in a plain navy suit, his hair combed neatly, but his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. His hands never left each other, fingers locked, a habit of guilt. Emma and Ella sat beside him under CPS supervision, wearing soft blue dresses chosen by Nora Patel to help them feel safe. Nora herself sat nearby, a quiet sentinel, her tablet resting on her lap. Dr. Marisol Chen had submitted her medical report earlier and now watched silently, her professional calm barely concealing anger. Officer Grace Holloway and Detective Owen Hale stood at the back, both in uniform, while Luke sat near the front, representing the responding officers. The defendant entered moments later. Victoria Hale Brooks looked every inch the victim she wanted to be. Cream blouse, modest skirt, hair styled into immaculate waves. Only her eyes betrayed her, sharp and restless. Her attorney, Mark Dillard, was a man in his 40s with sandy hair slicked back and an expensive suit that fit like armor. Known in Seattle for defending high-profile domestic cases, Dillard's smile was thin and strategic. He leaned toward her, whispering something that made her nod faintly. The prosecutor, Alyssa Trent, stood to begin. She was in her late 30s, tall and composed, with dark curls pulled back and a clear, steady voice that carried conviction rather than outrage. Once a child welfare lawyer, she had switched to criminal prosecution after a foster case went wrong years ago, a loss that had taught her never to underestimate charm in the service of cruelty. "Your Honor," she began, "this case is not about discipline. It's about domination. 2 children were silenced through fear, and when that fear cracked, the abuser tried to rewrite the story as madness. But evidence doesn't lie." She gestured toward the display monitor where photos appeared, burn patterns, recovered ribbon, the damaged iron. A hush settled. Daniel's head lowered, and even Victoria's lawyer looked uneasy. Alyssa continued. "Forensic results confirm thermal contact consistent with deliberate force. DNA matches the defendants on both devices. Moreover, the so-called therapist she cited was an identity stolen from a retired psychologist in Arizona." She paused, letting silence do its work. Control was her motive, deception her method. When it was Victoria's turn to speak, she played her part flawlessly. Tears gathered, voice trembling. "They hated me," she whispered. "They blame me for their mother's death. I tried to help them heal, but sometimes love looks harsh." Her words trembled at just the right places, but her eyes flicked toward Emma, and the girl flinched. It was subtle, but Judge Lowell saw it. She leaned forward slightly. "Love that leaves scars," the judge said quietly, "is not love." The defense faltered when Nora Patel testified. Calm and deliberate, she described each procedural finding, CPS records, inconsistencies in statements, and Victoria's attempt to delay medical intervention. Then came Dr. Chen, her tone clinical, but her gaze unwavering. "Injury distribution, timing, and depth confirm intentional harm," she stated. "These burns were not acts of accident or self-infliction. They were sustained by pressure applied for control." The courtroom was silent except for the scratching of pens. Luke was called last. Standing straight in uniform, he recounted the first moments. The smell of burnt hair, the silence upstairs, the sight of 2 girls clinging to each other while the iron still glowed. His voice didn't waver, but his jaw was tight. "Sometimes," he said, "a house tries to look perfect, so no one asks what's underneath. But when we opened that door, the house stopped pretending." Alyssa let that sentence hang before nodding. No further questions. When the gavel finally struck, the decision was clear. Victoria Hale Brooks was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with no possibility of early release for the first 10. Judge Lowell's final words lingered in the air. Children are not mirrors for a parent's vanity. They are lives entrusted, and betrayal of that trust carries its own sentence long after the law has spoken. Outside the courthouse, the first drops of rain began to fall. Daniel knelt beside his daughters, his hands shaking as he brushed hair from their faces. "We're going home," he whispered. "A real home this time." Nova waited near Luke's side, tail sweeping softly. Emma looked up at the shepherd and smiled, a small, quiet smile that reached her eyes. For the first time in months, Luke saw light return where fear had lived, and as the rain washed the courthouse steps clean, it felt as if the city itself was exhaling. Final message, voice of grace. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive in flashes of light or voices from the clouds. Sometimes, they come softly, in the shape of a child who dares to trust again, or a dog who guards what is good in us when we've forgotten how. The day Emma and Ella walked out of that courthouse, it wasn't just justice that had been served. It was redemption, born quietly beneath the gray Seattle rain. God's hand doesn't always tear the sky open. Sometimes, he works through weary officers, through doctors who stay past midnight, through strangers who choose to care. If you've ever looked at the world and thought it's too dark to change, remember, light rarely shouts. It whispers, and it begins in small acts of courage. Protect what is innocent. Speak when silence feels safer, and never doubt that the love you give, even unseen, is part of a greater plan that only heaven fully understands. May God bless every heart that still believes in mercy, every home that chooses kindness over control, and every soul that dares to forgive without forgetting. If this story touched your spirit, share it so others may feel that same grace. Leave a comment for those who still wait for their miracle. Subscribe so that together we can keep these stories of faith, courage, and compassion alive. And may the Lord watch over you and your loved ones tonight and always.